right, we're live. Good day, everyone. I hope you're all fueled with curiosity and excitement as we continue our journey through TestMu Conference 2024. Today's session is a real treat for anyone looking to stay ahead in the world of API testing and development. As technology evolves, so must the strategies, and there's no better guide on this path than AI. In this session, we're about to dive into how AI can transform the way we approach API workflows. From automating tedious tasks to enhancing efficiency, the possibilities are endless. And who better to lead us through this than Pooja Mistry, developer advocate at Postman. Pooja is not only a driving force in the developer community, but also a passionate educator who's ready to share how Postman's AI toolkit can be a game changer in your testing strategies. So let's welcome Pooja Mistry to the virtual stage and get ready to revolutionize the way we think about API testing. Over to you, Pooja.
Awesome. Thank you, Shantanu, for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen so that y'all can follow along. All right. So thanks so much for having me at the TestMu Conference 2024. I'm really excited to be sharing with you all some of the, things that we can kind of do with testing and development and AI. But before we go into that, I wanted to first kind of take you back to the start of what my career looked like. So I started off my career in a place that looked very much similar to this. So the year was 2015, and I had just graduated from the university, and I landed my first big job as a QA engineer. And I worked in a place that looked very much like this, which is maybe a place that you guys have also worked into that, might have worked in. So during that time, I spent most of my days working on manual UI testing. And as many of you know, manual testing can be incredibly time consuming. We had endless planning cycles. We had so many broken tests, and we also had a lot of different outages, as well as when the product would continuously change. So it was really hard to build a reliable test plan and increase our coverage across the various software architecture. So what our team did was that they brought us all to a 2-week basically workshop to empower one another on various tools and how we can empower our manual testing team to become more software developers and test developers, and increase our test coverage across different products on various environments. And this was a very lofty goal, but for a while, we were all very empowered, and there were a lot of different types of people that were put into the room. And since this goal was really big, we all sort of came together and were really excited about it. However, we slowly realized that with a goal so lofty, there's often a lot of disconnect. So there was a lot of disconnect on many sides. Developers developing their features, testers trying to build out proper test plans, manual testers trying to upskill automation, learn automation while figuring out old methodologies. So there wasn't really enough time. And so most of our months sort of look like this. We spent a lot of our times upscaling, figuring out the right tools, the frameworks that need to be implemented, and what kind of test suites we wanted to build, and what sort of coverage and tooling did we need. Automation testing for our, at the time, was always tricky when we had disconnected teams. And we were even considering restructuring, and using various different tools like Selenium, JUnit, Jenkins for automation. But ultimately, it was trying to empower a manual team to change their way of working. And so oftentimes we still ended up here. We still ended up in a place where we had failing test suite for days, until we found a tool, which was Postman, which really empowered not only our manual test teams, but also our automation test teams. And so Postman was one of those tools that was our manual test teams were already using to hit their APIs. they loved the dopamine rush they would see from getting those status 200s and validating the right correct data. And as a team, we found ways to organize our tests into collections, create sample scripts, and then use things like the collection runner for some of our automation. So we were thrilled to see how fast our team was moving, specifically using this tool. And so finally, we ended up here. And so what happened after we ended up here is that we increased our test coverages. We were all rapidly collaborating. And this was at a time when Postman was relatively young. And the idea of manual testing your APIs, sending your APIs, getting a 200, that looks very different than what manual testing looks like today, which is scripting. And so um, ultimately, this is what caused me to fall in love with Postman as a tester, and it became one of my favorite tools. And so flash forward 7 odd years later into 2022, I actually took on the role of not only being an internal advocate for Postman at my company, but then a developer advocate here at Postman. So I'm so excited to be sharing with you all of the things that Postman has been up to since those early days of building out collections to testing APIs to now what Postman is up to and how it empowers developers and testers all over the world to increase their coverage of their API lifecycle. And so it's a tool that is now being used by over 35 million people worldwide. And I'm really excited to share what we've sort of been up to. So, with that, let's talk a little bit about Postman. So, Postman has one of the largest API networks on the planet. It has over 30 million developers leveraging it. Actually, we recently got a stat that we're up to 35 million developers in just 2024. And so it is a tool that has been used on all parts of the life cycle and all parts of the world. We actually even serve some developers in Antarctica, if you can believe it or not. So it's a very global tool on that front. And every year we run this survey called the State of the API Report. So the 2023 State of the API Report is one of the most comprehensive surveys, and more than 40,000 developers and API professionals have shared their insights into development priorities. And so one thing that we learned from our 2023 survey is that there's a broad consensus that AI will boost developer productivity, with the largest responding forecasting 25% of improvements. So most developers now are going to be utilizing some form of AI when it comes to testing, development. And I want to show you how you can kind of do that with a tool like Postman. But some things that we also noticed from our survey is that we asked people how do they spend their time working on their APIs and how would they like to allocate that time. So 31% of the API time spent on coding is spent on coding, which matches an ideal state. But however, the other highest percentage of time is still spent on manual testing and debugging. And so what this means is that there's a inverse relationship to how much time people spend and also their company size. And so organizations with over 10 developers spend an average of like 37% of their time writing these APIs. However, this figure significantly drops. And since manual testing is still such a big part of development, this is a place that AI can really make leaps and bounds of increasing productivity. And so when we think about manual testing, there are obviously different edge cases that offer greater control. However, at scale, automation, efficiency, those things ensure more productivity and coverage. And so making the switch, empowering your testers to automate their APIs is pretty critical. But let's kind of take a look at the types of API testing methods that we have available. So here, we have that manual testing, which is that exploratory development debugging testing, unit testing, which is your BDD assertions, your contract validations, your integration testing, which includes end-to-end scenarios, regression testing, and then of course, your performance testing, such as load and stress and endurance spikes. And so these are the type of testing that is available, that is done on different aspects of the software architecture landscape. But we also see that from our state of the API report, we also see that the highest number of tests that are written are usually those functional and integration tests. So how does an API function? What is it? What kind of data is it giving back? And this is where we see AI really being harnessed as a tool that can increase a lot of that productivity. And so regardless of whether you're performing that manual testing or automation testing, starting with a testing plan is essential. So, when I think about a testing plan, there are three major steps to think about when embarking on the API testing process. So, one of the first steps I like to think about is understanding what your API's requirements are. What is the purpose of your API? How does that API function? And what are the results that might be expected? Who might your target consumer be? And what are your application's workflow? And where does that API fit into all of those things? Once you have that, you can go on and specify what are the inputs and outputs of your API. Inputs can include, headers and body types. However, outputs can be status codes and data validation. And then thirdly, you might want to organize your tests with similar functionalities. Like you might want to organize your happy path tests in one way and your negative path tests in another way, or you might want to organize by different API endpoint functionality. And so let's think about what exactly, when it comes to testing, what you should test for. So since testing involves even several or hundreds of API. These things might include testing for the correct status code, response format, testing for the right error conditions, such as invalid inputs or missing required parameters, or content type headers, or even testing whether or not your authentication and authorization is enforced. So ultimately, being able to test whether your data is accurate and matches its expected value, those are the things that are the most valuable when it comes to APIs and understanding API testing. So this is a list of just a few things that you can go ahead and test for, but all of these kind of boil down into what I like to say is your typical testing workflow. And so this is your testing workflow is a process essentially. And so a process for testing involves preparing tests. So what we mentioned before, understanding those API requirements, building out and creating different API requests for APIs such as for REST APIs, even for GraphQL APIs, gRPC, or even SOAP APIs, determining and organizing those requests into collection. So those three steps that we mentioned in starting with a good test plan. And then once you have that in place, what you ultimately run into is the process of authoring your tests. So previously, working with Postman, authoring a test meant setting up an endpoint within Postman and sending a request and then viewing the outputs. However, authoring tests now is also involves scripting, building out workflows. And with AI, I really feel like the needle of manual testing has moved. So with AI, you have a AI tool that can kind of do a lot of that sort of automation of building out your test scripts for you. And so that's what authoring tests might look like. And then you might run into what it looks like to run your tests. With Postman, there's a thing like collection runner to run all of your tests, or you can run them through different CI/CD pipelines with things like our Postman CLI or Newman, and set up different things like scheduled runs to monitor for various triggers and automatic testing processes. And then finally, once you have your tests organized, your tests authored, and your tests essentially running, this is where you want to continuously check for results, and think about what you're going to do with some of the failures that you might encounter. And so, with that, you might be now wondering how, Postman comes into play with all of this. Postman is a place to not only author these tests. Some people think of Postman as just a testing platform, but it's also a place that not only can you author these tests, but you can document, you can prototype, create different mock servers and environments. So, with that, I wanted to dive into some of the three main building blocks where Postman can be utilized for all things when it comes to testing. And so the first building block is collections. So collections are highly extensible and they can be automatically generated to create your API documentation. This is a place where you can go ahead and organize your tests and include things like variables and define and set API requests and build out entire test suites and more. And so collections can look something like this. So as you can see, they're a place to organize and build out workflows, and it's a place for you to collaborate and interface with your team. So with Postman, not only is it a platform for you to do this level of organization, but you can work with your team members to build out the right level of organization as well. And so, where does this work happen? And this work happens in workspaces. So, workspaces are the vehicle for collaboration. And so, in this new world, collaboration, what we once had in our cubicle days, we can now do online and we can now do through platforms such as Postman. And so, for example, this is an example of a partner workspace. This is where all of your collections and your tests can reside, and you can collaborate not only internally, but you can also collaborate externally. So if you had a partner that you were working with, a company that you were working with, you can collaborate with them to build out your entire workspace and all of your various API assets, and publish them on either a public network or even an internal private network as well. And so finally, the things that make your logic dynamic and they make your tests run are your scripts. And so scripts provide a workflow for logic in your Postman requests. And so they allow you to build out those dynamic testing and automation capabilities. And they're essentially a tool to make everything move smoothly. And so scripts can are the foundation when it comes to automation and testing. And so recently, we have also included a lot of new functionality in a V11 release that just came out this year that allows you to reuse scripts via a package library. And so your teams and individuals, you don't have to repeat any of your codes at all. You can actually change one script in one place, and that can be changed everywhere on your workspace. So that's one of our newest features that we've come out with when it comes to scripting. So some diving into just some test scripts. So here we have a couple of scripts that are used for testing. So one of the most common test scripts that we have are testing for things like status code. When it comes to API, one of the maybe first things you want to test is, am I getting the right status code back from my API? So you can use that by verifying your successful response. So here there's two examples. So one is using the pm.test method to check for a specific status code for 201. And then the other is also using the response method to check for either 200 or 201. So you can create a set, or you can even test for individual. You can test things that are in different value types. So for example, you can test for response times. Like for example, this is also being testing response format. So this is testing whether the various expected values are the right expected values for data accuracy. And then you can also test that things are in the specific response JSON. And then response time is also another test that can be written. So here we have a test for a response time is less than 200 milliseconds. So this is something where you want to be testing for some sort of threshold or some sort of performance. So this is, we have a test, you can always write a test for that. And then we also have tests for like all things data accuracy. You want to return that your API includes certain fields, certain types of things in your API schema, and you can check for those for proper data accuracy. And then finally, one of the most heftier tests sometimes to write is a contract test. And a contract test, you're validating that your API response matches your predicted contract. So these are all some of these tests that you can, of course, script with a tool like Postman. And I say that these are all tests that are necessary for all API tests, like considering a status code test, a response time test, data accuracy test, a contract test. These are some of the typical tests that you might want to run by default for all of your APIs. But now you might be wondering, okay, so I have these tests that I can write, but where does AI play a role in all of this? So right now we're in the age of AI. And so our CEO, Abhinav Asthana, we had our first user conference this year in 2024 called PostCon, and it happened earlier this May. And so our CEO had mentioned that this is the age of AI, and in the age of AI, everything is an API. So as AI continues to advance, APIs are evolving in parallel to amplify their potential. So what they need to do is that they need to be adaptable and user friendly as the AI technologies that they support. So with that, I wanted to introduce you to one of our newest AI assistants, which is Postbot. And so Postbot is a evolution to our manual days of sending your API requests through Postman, to writing your API scripts, to having this assistant that not only helps you increase your developer productivity by saving times writing your API tests, but it also helps you document and debug your requests. So what Postbot does is that it'll help you design better test cases for your API calls, and it'll understand the APIs that you're working with to speed up your API testing workflows. So what it can do is it can help you write large test suites from that are time consuming. So we talked about contract testing. That's a large test to write. The 5 tests that we went through: response time, response code, data accuracy. It can write some of these tests for you. It helps you visualize your responses, and it helps you get AI expert curated support. So one of those things, these are some things that can be really tedious when it comes to testing. And so with that, Postbot is one of those tools that not only helps you speed up that testing process, but it also helps you write the documentation and debug some of your APIs. So with that, I have a little video that I wanted to share, and then I could also share a live demo. But I wanted to show a video of Postbot in action. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and have you guys take a look at Postbot in action. So we have this one example of what Postbot's capabilities are. And so right here, I have a couple of different endpoints to get upcoming launches. And so we're trying to get launches around the globe. And you see that we're making a test that has failed. So with Postbot, you can see what's wrong. And this particular request is using environments. So Postbot notices that it's using environments, and now we can see that it's fixed that test and it's using the right dev URLs. So now we're going to see how Postbot is going to help us do some sort of testing and visualization. So when it comes to launches around the globe, maybe the best way we want to visualize is probably like a bar graph, right? No. Actually, probably the best way for us to visualize is a map. So you can see that Postbot here is taking that launch locations and is adding all of those visualizations from that particular API into a map. So this is what visualization looks like. Postbot is adding that code into your scripts tab, and it's taking the data from your API to do some of this visualization. So that kind of gets us to some of our things. So now that we've validated the right response, we want to make sure that the API works. So you can obviously add some tests to this request. Here we've added all of these tests from this request, and we can also fix certain tests. So in this case, we're fixing what is wrong with our date test. So here we have some issues, which is a issue that we can debug, and we can see that our date test has the wrong regex, and we can update the following using the following format. So you can see that Postbot is now updating the date test to have that specific format. And you can see all of those tests for response code, status code, those are all written successfully. And another way to work with APIs is also to do some autocomplete. So here we're using Postbot to write a contract test, and Postbot is auto-completing that into our entire script. And you can see that hefty contract test being written in seconds. So now you can see that that test is being written through Postbot in our AI tool, and it takes all of the data from your API schema to write that test successfully. And so one more thing that Postbot will be able to do is that once you have all of these contract tests, you might be wondering, okay, let's go ahead and document this entire testing process. So we want to add some fun emojis as well to our documentation. So you can use Postbot to now write all of the documentation. And here you can see that the documentation is automatically generated for that request. It tells you all of the details of your request input, your request output, what's in your JSON body as well. And it has accurately documented using all of the data that you might have set up in that specific request. So that makes your insights a lot faster when it comes to documentation, and especially when documentation is one of the most tedious things that we can do when it comes to working with our APIs. So let's go ahead and recap what we just saw Postbot do, and then I'll show you what this looks like through a live demo as well. So what we've seen is that Postbot can increase our productivity through test script generation. So what it can do is it can write individual tests. So you can add tests to this request. You can test for a specific response. So Postbot is adding specific tests to this request. It allows you to do that autocomplete type of testing. So after that, you have typed in natural language. It also auto completes the type of test that you might be interested in writing. So for example, if you're testing for things like what an expected output should be, what your contracts should look like, and it can do sort of that kind of autocomplete tests. So like Copilot, you can press that tab and it confirms that autocomplete as well. So now that we've seen that in action, you can also see Postbot fix your tests. So Postbot, you might have some issues when it comes to tests, like we saw that example of the date format not being properly formatted. So you can use that natural language and you can interact with Postbot through conversation to sort of change that fix any of those test results as well. And so this allows you not only to fix your results, but you can also use this as a debugging format. Sometimes with Postman, you might not have the right environment set up. So these are things that Postbot can easily catch as well. So we also saw that Postbot can visualize its responses. So here you can create visual representation of your JSON response. So in this example, you're using your API, which might be better visualized as a table. You can use Postbot to sort of do that easily used visualization. And then of course you can do documentation. And documentation is made a lot simpler with Postbot. And now there's not really even any excuse to not write documentation because it can automatically generate docs from your API request. So this is using all of the data from your response that you've set up and your requests that you've also set up as well. So any query parameters, any headers, any data in your body, it can easily document that on the documentation end. And then finally, we have Postman's AI expert support. So you can ask Postbot questions about Postman. So for example, there are a lot of features that Postman has. Some of these features such as mock servers or working with dynamic variables. So this LLM is actually trained on our learning center. So anything that you might be interested in Postman, how to work with even, reusable scripts, how to write a specific test, how to work with variables. These are all embedded within Postbot, and you have that embedded support as well. And so when it comes to automation, this kind of gears you up for the next stage of your automation workflow. And so we talked previously about the testing process. So here, once you've sort of prepared your tests and you've validated them, this is the whole process of authoring tests. Now, once you've used Postbot to sort of author and document your tests, you can then think of the next step in the testing lifecycle, which is automation. And so there are quite a few different ways that automation can work in Postman. So when we dive in, we can talk about things like the collection runner, which is a tool that allows you to run every single request in your particular collection. You can automate with the Postman CLI. So the Postman CLI, once you've written every single test using Postbot or your scripting methods, you can use the Postman CLI to configure to your CI/CD pipelines. And so some of the providers that we have available are like Jenkins, CircleCI, Bitbucket, all of those things. You can also automate using our scheduled runs. So scheduled runs allow you to trigger certain APIs at certain times to basically test for failures and errors as well. So this is sort of a monitor to sort of check the API's performance as well. And then finally, we have one more amazing use case, which is Postman Flows. And so Postman Flows allows you to sort of connect different API endpoints to one another to build out applications or completely brand new visual representation of Postman. So now that you sort of recapped that, I want to go back to, I should have had this slide as well at the end. This sort of gives you the end-to-end picture of what you're going to be doing with Postman. So the idea here is to go ahead and build out a workspace and collaborate with your teammates on a collection. This is where you can set up your API requests. You can document your requests using Postbot. So do all of your documentation of what your collection should be, what kind of what your API should include, and then add all of your tests and your automation to those requests. And then finally demo that to your customers or users or internal stakeholders who might be interested in your APIs. So that kind of shows you the whole end-to-end life cycle of how someone who might be working on just a testing piece can collaborate deeply with all members, product managers, and other stakeholders to build out and collaborate on a workspace for prototyping, documentation, testing, and demoing. And this gives you the full life cycle of working with your particular API in one unified platform. And so with that, you have both producers and consumers of your APIs sort of working hand in hand when it comes to working with particular APIs on a single platform. And so you're seeing that you can work remotely with people across from different countries, or you can work in the comfort of your home. You can work with different types of users to not only define, develop, test, secure, but you can also use Postman to discover and evaluate your APIs as well as test and deploy your APIs. And this is a single platform that sort of helps all users go through the entire API lifecycle in that way. So with that, I wanted to take this time to show a couple more, since we have a little bit more time left. I wanted to show some live examples of Postbot in action. So here I have a workspace with some APIs, and we have that upcoming launches API here as well. So this API is, doesn't have too many headers, or it doesn't have any scripts. It's actually taking all of the data from my particular launch, and I can, of course, write scripts using our snippets that we have here. But with Postbot, you can actually just launch it at the bottom of your screen, and you can go ahead and add tests to this request, and it should automatically generate those tests for you. And so it generates those 5 basic tests that every API should need, which is a response code, response time. It generates some sort of data validation tests, and then it also does some sort of like launch date type of validation for date format as well. And so here in our test tab, you can see that it has some tests that have passed and some tests that have failed. So for example, this took quite a bit of time to run, and it's written a test to be below 200 milliseconds. So maybe we can use Postbot to maybe fix this particular test. So you can see that it'll automatically try to fix this test for you. And so it's changed the response time as well. So for some reason, I think this particular test is taking quite a bit of time. Okay, there we go. So we got it under 300 milliseconds. So you can see that that test has now changed. But we also have this assertion test for this particular regex to match this particular value. And so if we wanted to use Postbot to fix that test, we can actually use some natural language here to see how we want to go about fixing that specific test. And so in this case, we can have, we can actually ask Postman to update the date format to, let's say this is the particular format right here. And it should ideally make that update. So you can see hopefully that it has now updated that format, because regex can be really tricky to write. And so ideally it should have now updated that format. Oh, okay. So you might need to play around with some of the updating, but it usually helps you fix some of these tests as well. And it kind of gives you certain information on various syntax as well. And so now it's added that date format right here, and it's passed that test. And then, of course, when it comes to documentation, every request has documentation associated to it. And so you can use Postbot to generate that documentation accordingly, and it should add some of that documentation pretty fairly quickly. So it tells you exactly what this endpoint is able to do. So this is a get request to retrieve upcoming launches, and then it gives you the documentation for all of what your JSON format should look like. So in this case, if we take a look at our JSON body, it has mapped ID, mission name, launch date, location, and all of those interesting things. So ideally, this is a really great tool when it comes to some of that simple level testing, and it requires you to sort of play around with it. So I would encourage anyone who's interested in working with Postman and working with AI to take a look at Postbot and see how it might change your API testing process. So when it comes to visualizations, you can also visualize some of this data. Here I'm visualizing it by a table. So you can do some visualization like that there. And so now you have a different way of visualizing your pretty response data into more of a table format as well. And you can play around with this table to get what you might be interested in. So this is how AI plays a role. And so with that, I have a couple more slides. So we talked earlier about our 2023 State of the API report. This year, we're finally launching our 2024 State of the API report. And so this is really great for us at Postman to, see how other API testers, developers, how they work with AI or how they work in general, what their workflow is like. So I wanted to give everyone a link to the State of the API report and encourage you all to take the survey and give us a little bit more insight on how you work with APIs, the challenges that you're overcoming, and what you guys see in the future of APIs. There's a lot of prizes that you can win as well. So we have Apple Vision Pro, we have PlayStation 5, we have lots of Amazon gift cards. So there's a ton of prizes that you might be in the running to win if you take this State of the API report and survey. But the data that I shared with you all from 2023, that's what shaped what Postbot and Postman and AI has looked today. So with that, we want this to be a constant evolution, and we'd love to get your insight on how you work with APIs and what your challenges are there as well. So I hope this session was insightful and exciting. If you're interested in learning about anything Postman related, you can follow me on Twitter or you can follow me on LinkedIn. I am always working with Postman, and I'm always sharing what's going on in the world of Postman and API development. So I hope this talk was inspirational to you all, and I hope this inspires you to try out AI and try something new. So thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate your time. And thanks so much for having me as your speaker at the TestMu conference for 2024. So with that, I will give it back to the moderator and see if we have any time for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Pooja, for that insightful session. I think Postbot is really changing the way people do API testing, and I hope that has helped most of our attendees today. And we have a bunch of questions that people have asked here, but I think we only have time for maybe a couple of questions. So I'll just post the most upvoted questions here for you. Does API testing with Postman also factor in security aspects of the API under test?
Yeah, for sure. So we actually have a brand new security feature called Postman Vaults. And so Postman Vaults is a place for anybody to add any of their encrypted data, any of their secure information for their APIs locally on their platforms. So when it comes to API testing, if you're working with local secret sort of information, the tests, what Postbot writes, those are really more functional tests for the most part. And you can do a little bit more like workflow type of testing, but there's a different feature for certain security aspects that you might be interested in, such as authorization, and then taking into account like your tokens and codes and things like that. So you can use some of those methods for encryption when it comes to some of the security aspects of your APIs as well. So yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Pooja. Dimitri, hopefully that answers your question. Okay, just going through another one. Could you discuss the limitations of current AI technologies in software development and testing, and how we might overcome them in the future?
Wow. Okay. So this is a really great and I think a much more broad question. I think when it comes to the limitations of AI technologies in software development and testing is actually seeing how an AI will understand and monitor your particular testing workflow. And so with Postbot currently, it's it understands that what a user's most tested type of tests are, and it's built off of that as a model in mind. But as people sort of change their workflows and work with Postman a little bit in a different way, it's still a tool that requires understanding on how a user might be testing specific APIs and what kind of data that they might be wanting to build out for different levels. So I think AI still, on this front, it's a great place to start and it will increase your productivity. But for it to understand what your workflow already is, it still requires you as the tester to kind of navigate that and build that whole thought process out. And so it shouldn't take into account that we, as testers, as developers, still need to be involved heavily in the AI development and API development process, because a lot of times people think that this is going to be a tool that will run on its own. I think we still need to be at the forefront of planning and building out the right workflows and things like that that we want to accurately test for. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's all the answers we have. We're at the end of session time as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much once again, Pooja, and thank you everyone for attending the session. Hopefully you learned a lot from the session, at least I did.
Yeah. I hope so too. Yeah. And, I've been seeing a lot more questions. And so feel free
Absolutely.
to, I guess, come to our booth, our virtual booth. And I'll be hanging out there for some time, and we'll be happy to answer some Q&A virtually there as well. So thank you all. And be sure to take our survey for our 2024 State of the API report as well. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.